Okay, this video is called Jordan Peterson is Wrong About IQ. I just want you to see this. This is my bathroom. I call it the magic bathroom. I'll talk about it more later, but basically I have a little portable table I slide over with my foot. I always read usually a big book while I'm on the loo. For number ones, I'll read a paperback, but the point is I'm always reading every day. That increases my verbal IQ. Right there, you can increase verbal IQ. It's easy to increase IQ. Jordan Peterson is full of BS, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so Jordan Peterson says that, I'm just going to quote Jordan Peterson. He says, IQ is a fixed number and it is impossible to change. IQ is the ability to solve random problems. IQ is easy to measure. It is reliable, reproducible. It is the most accurate number in all of psychology. If you want to throw out IQ, you might as well throw out all of psychology. Verbal IQ is much more important than mathematical IQ for the vast majority of people. And he thinks most of that other stuff about the 7 intelligence is all BS. It's not really reproducible and real. Okay, but verbal IQ is real. And he says IQ is the most accurate predictor of success in life. There is a massive difference between the intellectual capacity of people with really high IQs and really low IQs. He says in a technological society, there are few things that a low IQ person can do. People with IQs below 85 cannot be well trained to do anything. A person can study a narrow topic and get better at it, but that's not really increasing IQ because that does not generalize to other things. Okay, so that's what Jordan Peterson says about IQ, and I think that's an overly harsh statement on IQ, and I think that's part of the mentality of the elites, the big controllers who want eugenics, okay? And what Jordan Peterson says is basically somebody with an IQ 85 or less, they basically can maybe work as a janitor. That's about it. All right, so anyways, that's what he says about IQ. Now I'm going to give you my impression on IQ, okay? First of all, we know food can increase IQ. We know breastfeeding can increase IQ. And we know there's things that'll lower IQ. We know that aluminum lowers IQ. We know that F- in the water lowers IQ. Well, guess what? In your tap water, there is aluminum and F- in most cities, in most municipal tap water, okay? I would also predict that I think being a swimmer probably lowers IQ. Now, people say, well, how could you say that? Well, most of the time they're swimming in tap water. It's full of chlorine. It's full of, probably got F- in it, and it's probably from tap water. It's probably got aluminum in it, too. So why, if you're swimming in that, wouldn't that lower IQ? And I only say that because I went to Stanford, which is a big swimming school. They're like national champions and All-Americans in swimming, and I never met a smart swimmer. So I don't know if it's because of the water. Maybe it's because I don't know that many of them, but that was my experience. I hung around a lot of athletes at Stanford. Okay, we know good food can increase IQ and bad food can lower it. So we know food can change IQ. All right, the next thing is traumatic brain injury lowers IQ. You know, sports like boxing, MMA, and other sports where there's a lot of head trauma, that can lower IQ. Some sports guys that got lots of concussions, that can lower IQ. Also, I know having a role model increases IQ, a good role model. My father was a good IQ role model. Every day, he'd wake up early in the morning. He was a doctor, and he would work all day. He'd come home in the evening. He would take the dog for a walk so he'd get some exercise, and then sometimes he would jog, and then he would sit in his bed and he would read books, and he would listen to classical music. My mother also liked classical music. I had a girlfriend who liked classical music, so I listened to a lot of classical music when I was young. But the point is, my dad, every day he was reading books. So I wanted to be like my father, so I was always reading a lot on my own. Even though I really didn't like school. I hated school because I told you they put me in solitary confinement for 2 years. And, you know, I think I was smart and I just did stuff fast. But anyways, I didn't learn much in school. Okay, getting back to my father, my wanting to be like him and him being my role model, an academic person, that motivated me to read. And then my uncle would come over. We would argue about books. So it was the personality of the family trying to be like my father and to argue with my uncle, who was also a physician, a psychiatrist. That made me get good at reading books and arguing about them. I was very much used to doing that. Let's see, what else? My dad was a doctor, and because he was a doctor, I knew a little bit about medicine, but he was a fuzzy foreigner. Okay, he couldn't teach me anything about America. I never took an honors class in high school. I never took an AP class. I didn't even know what an AP class was when I was in high school. But the fact that, you know, then once I thought I was going to be an athlete, a wrestling coach, but then I got injured in wrestling, and I started to think, well, gee, I might have to do something academic. And my dad was a doctor. I go, well, maybe I'll take a try at being a doctor. That's kind of how the logic went. My mom was very funny as a role model. And I noticed that everybody liked my mother. And I was popular in high school, but in college I was no longer popular because wrestling at Stanford was low status. And I studied all the time. I became a little bit socially awkward. So I noticed, gosh, my mom's always cracking jokes. Everybody loves being around my mom. Everybody I meet loves my mother. I'm like, yeah. Nobody wanted to talk to me about books and ideas. I always would want to talk about books and ideas, but no one else did. So I kind of studied. I looked at my mom. She's the most popular person I knew in my social circle. And I'm like, gee, I got to do comedy. So I'd watch all the comedian DVDs. I would read their books. I'd memorize all the jokes. I wrote out their whole routines, and I had them all memorized. And so I know when I was around people, they like it when I would just tell jokes. So I would just tell joke after joke after joke. But nowadays, you can't do that anymore because everybody's offended by everything. There's this big promotion of the LGBTQ and all this stuff. And it's really, I think the big controllers, they don't really care about it. They're just saying they do because they want to use it to destroy the traditional heterosexual Christian family. But I don't think they actually really care about that group of people. That's just, a smokescreen, a gas, lighting. But that's what's going on in the real world. So you can't joke anymore because everybody's offended by everything nowadays. But 1980s was the best decade. We had the best comedians. But getting back to increasing IQ, so that's how I learned all the comedy and stuff, because of my role model. Okay, I'm lucky I had good role models. My parents were good people. Even though I wish they would have coached me more, I learned a lot of things in life the hard way. Okay, screwing up, and then later on I figured out how to fix it. Okay, personality is a giant part of social development, giant. My father would also sometimes watch, the BBC television shows, the England, even though there was some resentment towards England, they were the best things there that there were on TV in that time. So we'd watch the movie together, Tests of the D'Urbervilles. Okay, and I'm a young kid, 12, 14 years of age. I don't really understand Tests of the D'Urbervilles or The Mayor of Casterbridge, the Thomas Hardy novels, the Charles Dickens novels. I don't really get them, but I get them enough that I try to read them. I want to talk about these books with my father because I always wanted to be around my father more. He was working most of the time, so I wouldn't really get to see him that much. So I was trying to be like him, and the fact of the matter was I couldn't remember those books. I couldn't really remember the storyline because I didn't have the maturity, the life experience to understand them. But my vocabulary was really good. I would just crush spelling tests. I would crush vocabulary tests because I was always reading and talking to my dad whenever I could. Okay, my mom was not an academic person. She never once read a book in my entire life did I ever see her read a book cover to cover. And I think in general, women don't read as much as men. Nowadays, we're forced to pretend that women and men are the same, but they're not, okay? Women usually are busy taking care of their kids, and they're usually much more social than men, okay? Anybody who says otherwise is full of crap, okay? My wife makes at least 1,000 phone calls for any phone call that I make, okay? My father never once made a phone call. I never once saw the guy make a phone call, ever, never. Anytime his friends came over, and they often did at family events, my mom called all his friends, okay? We're just not as social as women, and that's just reality. Okay, and I realize some men are more social than others. Some women are more social, less, whatever. But in general, women are a lot more social. I see it, when I'm around the women and like at my work or something. If there's a social event, like a big, a feast day, whatever, some holiday or something, they're all over it, okay? Or somebody's birthday or something. Again, we just show up when we're told to, okay? We don't care. We don't do much with that sort of stuff. Okay, getting back to personality. Is a giant part of brain development. Because I wanted to be educated to talk to my father and argue with my uncle, I pushed myself in that sense, even though I could care less about school when I was young. Having the growth mindset is real important. That's Carol Dweck, was a psychologist from Stanford who wrote about that, an entire book about it. And it's a good concept. Basically, if you believe you can improve and you try, you'll improve. If you believe that it's impossible to improve and you don't try, you won't improve, okay? And the other thing, too, is I've seen lots of doctors who are stupid. And when I say stupid, I mean I don't see any really bright words coming out of them. They're real conformist. What I'm getting at is they didn't have to be that smart to get through med school, but they are really hard workers. I've never seen a lazy doctor because there's always somebody on your ass when you're a doctor. Faster, faster, work more, like with a whip. Psh, there's always some bean counter saying, how many billing codes did you generate today? They always pretend that you're caring about the patients. How was your productivity? Patient service. Yeah, right. They care about generating billing codes. So that somebody's on a doc's butt that they better generate a bunch of billing codes every day. So they have to go fast. But lots of them barely made it through school, flunked all their tests, don't really have much interest or knowledge about anything medical. Okay? I talk to doctors every day. I know exactly what they know and what they don't know. What I'm trying to say is they got through it with motivation. They weren't that smart. And I only say this because people say, well, this doctor is so smart, this non-doctor is not smart. And I say that's not true at all. I've met lots and lots and lots of non-doctors who are real smart and lots of doctors who are not. Okay, and you'd be amazed at how dumb a lot of them are. Amazed, literally amazed. A lot of them are motivated by money. I mean, don't get me wrong. In med school, everybody wants to help the patients, and they do too afterwards, but they're going to follow that standard of care and conform to it. Some of them went into it largely for money. Like I've had doctors tell me, why do you try so hard? Why do you read all these books? Why do you put so much effort in your presentations back in the day when I was a medical student and a resident and a fellow? And I'm like, well, I want to do the best possible presentation. They're like, it's all bullshit. We're just, practicing medicine is selling hot dogs. The more hot dogs you sell, the more money you make. I've had other doctors tell me things like, the reason I went into one of the NPCs, the no patient cares fields, is because I just want to make money. I can't make money any other way. I'm good at school, so this is what I did. I don't want to be involved in direct patient care. The patients, they're smelly, they're stinky, they're obnoxious. I don't want to be around them. That's what they say. I'm telling you. These are some of the things I hear. But the big thing I would say is, in terms of IQ, is that most people don't care about brain development. I kind of made that point that you don't have to be that smart to do in school if you have good determination. All right? Because he kind of implied what Jordan Peterson basically said is most people are too stupid to ever do well in school. And I'm telling you, you'd be amazed. I'm amazed at how stupid some people are. The range of intelligence amongst doctors, it's giant. I think if you talk about academic IQs, it's probably in the range of about 110, up to the highest ones then. Okay. Hardly any of the doctors I know read on their own. Most of them all say, they're too busy. It's more likely to have a guy, because a woman's usually busy taking care of her kids. When she's postmenopausal, her kids are grown up, then she'll have a little more time to read. But hardly any of them read on their own. The smart male doctors I know, the smart ones, they'll read about one book a month. Okay. Typically, that'll be the case. They'll have one book and they'll be nursing it. They'll have it next to their work area, and they'll just go through a couple pages when they get a chance, and they'll probably finish it, by about the end of a month. That'd be like the typical doctor I know who reads. Some smart doctors will ask me to teach them. I've had doctors come and ask me, explain them my theory of the brain, the spine, and a whole bunch of other things, pathophysiology, hypertension, and whatnot. And they tell me they're amazed at what a joke their conferences are, their grand rounds are. They say it's all a big joke, that nobody knows what they're talking about, which I find rather amusing. But they're still chicken shits. They're still scared to ever ask me to lecture. Let's see, what else? I've known kids from academic families or cultures where good grades were expected. So these kids overachieve. You'll often see that in Asian kids, okay, and kids from other ethnic groups where there is parental pressure to do well in school. Like I knew this one patient, he was from Okinawa, and he says in Okinawa, they tell the child, this is like Japanese culture, you are expected to do better than your parents. You are expected to be more successful academically than your parents. And they put a lot of peer pressure on them. It's like a family honor thing, man. So the kid's going to be motivated to work. Okay, another thing is like I went through a phase when I was younger where I wanted to be a writer. And I read all these writers, and so many of them said, if you want to be a writer, you better read a lot. That's where you develop skill with words. So I read a lot more. And what I'm trying to say is it was my personality and desire that got me to be good at these things. If you read every day, your vocabulary will go up. It'll increase. You will have a higher verbal IQ. And verbal IQ for almost everybody is a lot more important than math IQ. Okay, when I was a high school senior, I was taking a math statistics class, and the teacher was one of my wrestling coaches, and I didn't like him because I felt that he had kind of really pressured me to come back and wrestle before my collarbone growth plate fracture was healed, and I got re-injured, and I was out for a long time after that, so I was pissed off at him. Okay, and I was being a passive-aggressive, immature kid, so I didn't really study for his class, and I was failing the class. A letter was sent home to my parents that I'm flunking the class. My entire Christmas vacation senior year, I had to do statistics homework and switch my grade option to pass or fail, and I ended up getting a P for pass. But it was rather embarrassing, and what I'm trying to say is that's how I did when I didn't care about the class. Later on, though, I decided, well, I got to get serious about school. Maybe I'm going to be a doctor or a scientist or something educated. So I decided, and I was told I had to take calculus. So that summer I took calculus, and then I also was pissed off because these guys on the cross country team, like a bunch of them, had done better than me on the SATs, and I was pissed off. I'm like, why should everybody be better than me? I want to be better, and maybe I got to be an academic. Maybe I won't be an athlete anymore. So I just bought the little book. You could buy it for $10 at that time. And I just did SAT questions and problems on my own. My score went up like 270 points. That's a giant amount. And what I'm trying to say is there was no change in my brain. There was no change in my IQ. I simply opened up a book and studied. And SAT test, I went up 270 points. I crushed it. I did better than those guys had done, okay? All those valedictorian type guys in my class. All right, then I get recruited to Stanford as an athlete. And, I took the easiest classes I could take for my first semester, my first quarter. They're on a quarter system rather than a semester system. And I got like B minuses in these easy classes. I started studying study skills. I took this how to college class for study skills. I sought out the guys who were the best students, and I said, please teach me. I found a guy at Stanford getting A pluses, and I just hung around them. I just followed him around, copied everything he did. Okay? And I got A's that for the first time that winter. I got an A, my first single A out of it, and then everything else B's. Then the next year, I had sort of like figured out study skills, and I copied what that guy did. I got A pluses in the most difficult classes, evolutionary biology and organic chemistry. They were difficult because that was the pre-med, the red hot pre-meds. And at Stanford, the average red hot pre-med's got about a 99.8 percentile academic performance on their SATs and whatnot. And so what I'm trying to say is I went from being a B minus student in easy classes to getting A pluses in the most difficult classes. There's no change in my IQ. There was no change in my brain. My academic IQ just increased. And it's obvious, if you want to increase your academic IQ at any academic class, study the night before the lecture, okay? Before biochemistry, when I was in med school, I would read for hours, sometimes 4 hours before I'd go to class the next day. And then I ended up crushing biochemistry. It's like A++++ in biochemistry. There's no intrinsic change in my brain. I simply prepared for it. Okay, if you sit in the front row, you don't have distractions, you avoid distractions, your IQ, your academic IQ for that subject goes up. The more I watched comedians and read books and practiced telling jokes, the better I got at telling jokes. I've tutored students who were flunking out, like in the urban health program, okay, and then they did real well. I've had doctors who failed their boards multiple times. They come to me, they study with me just a couple times. I explain them how to approach a test. They pass their boards. I've had students flunking out of nursing school and other college programs. I help them a little bit, and they pass. So what I'm trying to say is a tremendous amount of academic. So IQ is just ability to solve academic problems or any random problems. You can dramatically improve it if you simply make it your goal to improve it, to develop your brain. Most people don't care about the brain. They just want to make a little money so they can get some food to eat, a shelter over their head, and then, somebody to make the two-back beast with. And what I'm saying is if a person actually wants to develop their brain or has a good teacher, they'll dramatically, rapidly increase their academic performance. So the real issue is this sort of thing. And don't get me wrong, there is some intrinsic difference in people's academic ability. Everybody knows that from their family and from their life exposure. But most people are capable of much, much more academic performance than what they actually do, just because by the time they realize what's going on and figure it out, whoop, they're in their 20s already and they're kind of done with academics. They got to go work. So anyways, I'm making the point, Jordan Peterson is totally wrong about IQ. And Binet knew that, the Stanford Binet IQ test way back in the early 1900s. It's been known for a long time. So I make that point that if a person really wants to develop themselves, you can dramatically, I would say, learning study skills and having good academic habits and avoiding the bad stuff, that's worth about 30 to 40 IQ points. Okay? So, it is what it is. You have to have that desire, and so the person has to have the desire to do it. And when you got that mindset, that pushes you to it. But you got to have that. If you don't have that, where's the energy going to come from? That's why one of the things I do when I talk with a student who wants to improve their academic performance, I spend a long time saying, why do you want to study this? What are your goals? What motivates you? Who are your academic heroes? Because once you get that straight, you get tons of energy. I'll just tell you one last story because it makes a big difference in performance. There was Goethe. He's a German writer like the Shakespeare of Germany, and he wrote this book called The Sorrows of Young Werther. And basically, young Werther was in love with this girl, Charlotte, and she was probably going to marry some guy who was away for about a year or two, and he just was in love with her, and he'd write letters to his friend Wilhelm about how much he loved her, how she walked, how she talked, how she interacted with her siblings, how she dressed, how elegant she was. And what I'm saying is, Fall in love with biology like he was in love with Charlotte, and you'll get really good at it. Fall in love with any academic subject, and you'll get really good at it. Instead of just, working for a grade, work because you want to learn the subject, because you might become that someday because you're really curious about it. And you'll be amazed at how great academic performance goes up. And that's also why great teachers can have such a giant difference in the performance of their students, because they nurture that curiosity, that human love of learning and to seek the truth. And if you can nurture that, you get great performances. Like, look at the book Whisperer, that 6th grade teacher lady. Instead of forcing the kids to read a book as a class where they only read about 2 or 3 books a year, she let them read whatever book they want, had this giant library in the classroom. Her students read an average of 42 books a year, and they were all the best students in the school in every single subject. And that's what I'm saying. That's where it comes from, that desire to improve, that love of learning. That kicks the crap out of forced learning any day and generates incredible academic performance. So anyways, hope that was helpful.